Part two. So I know I did a lot of jumping around with that last video, but I I did all that to set a precedent, to set a background for the fact of if you analyze the things that I said when it comes to the God in the Bible, you realize that this God is neither the moral compass nor the perfect entity that we have all been misled to believe. And we've all been misled to believe that God is perfect. Specifically in America, we've been given this false notion of God is perfect, but yet when you objectively, since we're using that word so frivolously, in my opinion, when you frivolously, not frivolously, when you objectively analyze the character of God in the Bible, you realize that whoever wrote about this entity or whoever documented the acts of this entity most certainly either left too many mistakes within the text or accurately conveyed the flaws in the character of this entity, i.e., the Lord God or the Yahweh Elohim, whatever you want to call him, Jehovah. It doesn't really matter to me. So, why is all of this relevant, right? Why is the setting the basis, setting the understanding for the type of entity we're dealing with? Why is that so important, right? So, let's look at the entirety of the Bible, right? Regardless of the facts of Genesis chapters 1 through 5, when it comes to specifically Genesis 2 and 3, when it comes to the actions of the woman known as Eve in the garden, that whole story still frames and paints that woman as the downfall of mankind from society. There's that. Then you have the oppressive language that God or the Lord has used repeatedly to Israel and Judah whenever they would go a whoring or going after other gods of other countries or whatever. And not only were they doing that, and, God would talk about punishing them. He would call them whores. He would call them out their names. He would threaten them with destruction, with death. He would threaten to make them desolate. And that is the exact same type of pathology, the exact same type of recourse that you see a lot of men go through whenever they're being rejected by a woman that they, took as their girlfriend, as their wife, or whatever you want to call it. Even now, you have men that are not in relationships with women that react violently because women turn them down or do not give them the answer that they were wanting, or do not meet their expectations, or placate their ego and their entitlement by giving these men submission and a smile, is all I like to call it. Again, this is building up to a greater point. So now let's skip through the rest of the Old Testament. Let's get to the New Testament when it comes to that false apostle Paul. And I can talk about this at another time, but Paul was definitely a false apostle. He never knew Jesus, never met Jesus. That whole story on the road to Damascus was a concoction between him and his boy Luke. But that's besides the point right now. What I want to get to is what Paul told Timothy in I think it was First Timothy or Second Timothy chapter 2 verses 12 through 15, when he says that it was the woman that was deceived, and pretty much uses that to say that that's why men should be the leaders and men should be the head of the women and stuff like that. First and foremost, when you actually read Genesis chapter 2 and 3, you realize that that is a lie. The woman was not deceived. The woman was not tricked. She was not lied to. She was not beguiled. Paul saying this about that situation in Genesis chapter 2 and 3 is how you know that he never knew exactly. He doesn't know what actually happened. Whoever wrote the character of Paul and put that in there is somebody that has not taken the time to actually read Genesis chapter 2 and Genesis chapter 3 to figure out the fact that it was not the serpent that lied in that story. The only two entities to lie in that story would have been God in Genesis chapter 2, and then Eve lied to God in Genesis chapter 3 when she said that the serpent lied or beguiled her. But again, that's besides the actual point that I'm trying to get to. The point that I'm trying to get to is now from Genesis chapter 2 and 3 to what Paul says in Timothy concerning a man supposed to be the head of woman. You have the whole infrastructure of male leadership and male government being constructed within the confines of the Bible, right? Not saying the world didn't already move like that, but for those that choose to adhere to the book and adhere to it blindly without putting any thought and any type of real consideration to what they're reading, that is essentially putting women at the behest of men as in a state of servitude, right? And that was really, biblically speaking, that was really the whole purpose of women. The only reason God made Eve, according to the Bible, is because he saw that Adam was lonely and felt like it wasn't a good thing for Adam or man to be lonely. So instead of teaching this man some introspection so he can be happy with himself, he decided to give this man a playmate, a plaything, something that will make him happy, but not necessarily have that same notion be returned to the woman in the equation. And that's an important dynamic to keep in mind and to remember. So anyways, why is all of this so important? If you know me and you've been following me on like the various platforms, Facebook and stuff like that, Twitter at times, you'll know that I've been asking this question. Why is sexual assault and sexual deviancy, sexual perversion so rampant and so malicious within the house of God, right? And I grew up a Christian, so I'm specifically talking about the Christian church. More specifically, I didn't go to church on Sunday. I went to church on Saturday. But within the confines of Christendom, Christianity, why is sexual assault so rampant? Not only do you have the issue of maybe the deacon or the preacher or the pastor having sex with the women of the congregation outside of wedlock or whatever, which I don't necessarily think that's necessarily morally wrong, but if you believe in the Bible, then it should be wrong. But you also have these pastors that have been sexually assaulting a lot of these little girls, a lot of these women, a lot of these little boys. Some of the ones that have had allegations so far have been like Pastor Ricky G. Rush. I'm pretty sure everybody remembers Eddie Long. And let's not talk about the Catholic Church, because out of all the different denominations of Christianity or maybe even Protestantism, the one that has the most publicized issues of sexual assault, especially when it comes to like children, pedophilia, is the Catholic Church. And as quiet as it's kept, though, there is an issue with sexual assault and sexual perversion in the black churches in America specifically as well, but also churches in Africa, and other churches as well, because within the confines of these institutions, aka these churches, and the Jews have some shit going on as well. Don't think they're left out. But within the confines of these institutions in the black community, and even in the white community, aka Catholicism, I know black people and people of other ethnicities and stuff are part of that too, but that's not the point. You have an infrastructure of people being protected, people being enabled that are sexual predators that are not being held accountable. And it's because the Bible, through the works of Paul and even through the works of the Old Testament, with what it said about the woman, is creating a infrastructure, is creating a background, is creating a system that keeps these type of predatory men protected and keeps them in places of power so they can keep preying on the people that they come into contact with. Now, we always have issues with politicians that have come out and find that they've been paying prostitutes, politicians that have been taking them part in the sex trafficking of minors, like what's that dude named Jeffrey or Jerry Epstein and stuff like that. We have issues with that. But when it comes to acknowledging the sexual deviancy and the sexual assault in our churches, which has been enabled and established thanks to the rhetoric of what happened in Genesis chapter 2 and 3, and the rhetoric of this false apostle Paul in the New Testament, you have to understand that you are dealing with a system that enables the predation of young people. It enables the predation of everybody pretty much. But when it comes to children are some of the most underprotected demographics, or most underprotected demographic when it comes to these religious institutions. Women are too, and it's because they've been put at a disenfranchised place or spot as a result. But when you actually realize that these children, which back then, now a child we know is still 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, and you could even still say mentally up to like maybe 20, 21. But specifically, we know for a fact a child is going to be anybody under the age of 18, 17 in some places, at least in America. You have this whole system that is enabling, this whole religious system that is enabling the predation of these minors, of these kids. And it's because of the words of this alleged perfect God that he allowed to be put into a book and then be called his word. This dude that I'm talking to or talking about that says he's not a pedo or whatever, you do condone pedophilia because your God was a pedophile when he had sex with Mary, who was at the oldest, no older than 16. Right. And this goes back to what I said in my last video. He knew that we reach a point where we realize those things were wrong. Yet your God still allowed his spirit. If you let the Muslims tell it, it was an angel. I think they said it was Gabriel or something like that. But the point is, this spirit is at least 1,000 years old, whatever it be the spirit.